Few are taught the fundamentals of finance and money management in school. This limited series podcast tackles the basics all students need to know to become financially independent, made by students for students. My name is Kosta and welcome to episode 2 of the Money Class podcast. On this episode, we talk about self-awareness, opportunity cost, the value of losing money, and risk management. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Class show. This is episode 2. My name is Kosta. If you don't know who I am, I'm a second-year Concordia University student studying economics and English literature, and I love anything that involves business, entrepreneurship, arts, and I want to find a way to mesh all of that together. And
So hey guys, my name is Marc. I'm a third-year finance student already at Concordia, like Kosta, and I love anything that revolves around investing, academia, personal finances. And really just, spreading knowledge to people, just in general. So I find that a lot of fun.
Awesome. So, Marc, for this episode, actually, I brought in a few books that I want to talk about. I'm going to show the people watching the video version. So it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and the other one is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. The reason I'm bringing in these books, and the reason I want to talk about these two books is because they were probably in the first 5 books I ever read about finance or investing or just money management, and they really opened up my eyes. So I did kind of scroll through some of the pages because I highlight a lot, and I'm going to go through some of the highlights, and I want us to talk about some of the passages, and you can let me know what you think, and I'll let you know what I think. All right?
Okay, sounds good. Sounds fun, yeah.
Okay, so first we're going to start with the one everybody kind of reads, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I'm going to go through some of his little quick tips that he has over here. Now, some of them have to do with time, and I know you did talk about time in one of your other series you're doing on your own on Instagram, right? So, he is saying that loss of time, okay, let me give you a little backstory here, or let me clarify some things. When he's talking about making decisions, making any financial decisions, there are 3 things you kind of have to worry about or think about. The loss of time, the loss of additional capital, and the loss of education, all right? So the first thing he talks about is loss of time, where he says during which other assets could have grown in value. So when you're buying something,
that's opportunity cost.
Loss of additional capital, which could have been invested instead of paying high home maintenance expenses. So he's talking about houses here, but yeah. All right. Number 3, loss of education. Too often people count their house and savings and retirement plans as all they have in their asset column because they have no money to invest. They simply don't invest. This costs them investment experience. Most never become what the investment world calls a sophisticated investor. So I guess that has to do with learning through risks or through playing it safe, and I guess the damage that can be caused through certain choices you make. So what are your thoughts on what he said right there? Let me know if you want me to clarify anything, and I'll give you my thoughts.
Yeah, so do you want to go with the first one about time? What was the main idea about that one as well? It's that...
Let me get that out right now. Loss of time. So essentially, it's the opportunity cost. When you're looking to buy something versus what your assets could have done if you went somewhere else.
Okay.
Situation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that one is quite... I wouldn't say logical, but that one, it makes a bit of sense. You only have a certain amount of time to do something. You only have a certain amount of time in a day, right? I think it's 81,000 seconds, something like that. So it's a question of how do you want to spend your time, and is it the best way of spending it? When you invest something, let's say, there's only a return that you make over a year. You can't, with that same money, make that return twice. You can't go back in time and say, I wish I had taken something else. So it's I think it kind of goes with the second idea as well, where your opportunity cost with the house, let's say, as the example, is that you can only put your money so many places. So the actual opportunity cost is more than what your initial disbursement is.
Mm-hmm.
So an example, you spend $100 to buy an iPhone. Obviously not. No, you spend $1,000 to buy a phone. Well, that $1,000 is actually worth so much more than $1,000. That one is worth, what could you have done with that money otherwise? Right? So if you had placed that in an investment, we saw that last week, if you had placed that at 10%, let's say, something like a 10% return year over year, that $1,000 would have been worth $2,000 in 7 years. So your iPhone all of a sudden is not worth $1,000 today, but it's actually worth the loss of $2,000 over the course of 7 years. So I think that's kind of the opportunity cost that goes hand in hand with when you buy something or when you invest in that, is that, you know, with time you're able to grow your earnings, but also you can only spend it so many ways. You can only spend it in so many places.
For sure, for sure. So would you recommend, say, especially because this podcast is very much like directed to students, how would you want them, or how would you advise them to go about their money? Would it be through like a stock form of investment? Would it be through maybe investing in themselves through education? Like a lot of people go ahead and do courses online with their extra time instead of, let's say, taking that money and putting it in the stock market. What would you think is like best?
Well, I think your personal education is the most important. I think what you gain is the best investment you can make, because it's the only one that's going to follow you throughout your entire life, right? You know, the return on like I just enrolled to the CFA exam in May, and that's, you know, $1,500 Canadian, right? But what else could I have done with that $1,500, right? I could have invested it somewhere else, the market, and maybe that could have grown. But the advantage for me writing the CFA is so much greater, because the investment in yourself is I think the number one thing, right?
For sure.
You know, I'm not saying go get $100,000 master's degree, but if that degree is gonna help you progress in your career, help you progress as a person, then the investment in oneself, you know, why would I invest in someone else when I shouldn't just invest in myself first?
I agree.
That's kind of the way I see it.
I totally agree. I had this, this was a big dilemma I had a few years ago, and I was like, do I invest the money I have right now, or do I go ahead and like educate myself? And through like a lot of just, I was checking to see what everybody thought on the internet, which is kind of weird to say, but it's mostly like the experts or like the like famous personalities that talk about money. Not Reddit. Reddit is the worst place to go for any advice. But yeah, everybody talked about investing in yourself first, and really making sure that, you know, you're in a place where you know what you're doing with yourself before, like you said, invest in other people. So I went ahead and took a bunch of courses on Coursera about like business analytics, and I learned a lot through that. And I even did a few data science courses. And honestly, I feel like some of that stuff informed my decisions when it came to making investments now. And I'm sure that's going to be the case in the future too, right? So there are ways where you can become a more informed person who can better manage their money through like courses you take.
But then there's also the problem of people who overeducate yourself.
That's
right?
true.
I understand. We're 21. So we're still young, right? But I'm talking about, imagine the people who do 2 bachelor's degree, 3 masters, a PhD, postdoc. They're like 35 years old and they've never been able to, to start their lives. And I think there's a certain threshold where you have to say, okay, investing in myself is important, but I have to start like actually building something. That's kind of the way I see it.
That's totally true.
I believe in chapters in your life. And if the chapter of education is one of them, while the chapter of education, you should always be pursuing new knowledge and new education, new ways of doing things. At some point you take what you say and you say, okay, I'm ready to start and to start investing. I'm ready to start in the workforce. I'm ready to start personal life and family. I'm ready to get married. It's a question of if you always wait for the right time, you'll never end up doing anything.
Yeah.
Right? So I think at some point you have to say that's enough. I have enough, I have enough diplomas. Let me start working. Let me start my career.
Yeah, there's this thing I always tell myself too, which is school in a way is for you to learn how to learn, not necessarily to learn about certain topics a huge chunk of the time, right? So, yeah, you learn so much more during an internship or even like being a part of certain clubs than I'd say a lot of classes you take in school. So yeah, that's definitely important. You need to have actual practical experience because theory alone is not going to take you far. You're totally right.
Yeah. And I think employers are realizing that now with they're taking a lot of students, they'll graduate, they'll have a good grade, but they have no work experience. So they're just a piece of paper. And as terrible, as unfortunate it is to say, if you don't have the work experience, you could be the best programmer, but you've never written code. How good are you really? Right? And not to knock anyone. But it's a reality that we're setting because a bachelor degree has become such a relatively easy thing to get, right?
It's the new norm.
It's almost the new norm. Yeah, and an MBA is starting to become that as well, or having the CFA is in finance is starting to creep up on that, where it's like, oh, well, I guess I got to do a CFA or I have to do an MBA. Well, that's a lot of time. It's a lot of money you're putting to something.
That's very true. But with that, the big thing is when it comes to finances, money management, especially because we're young, I don't think people should be too afraid to take risks at the same time. Because, in 10 years, you're going to be 30 years old. 30 years old is still very, very young. So don't be afraid to, take your money and do things that might be a little risky, but where you might learn something through it. There's someone I know, well, he's more of like a personality on the internet because I watch a lot of YouTube videos and I read a lot of books about people. And what he did was that he made $5,000 in high school. And instead of investing that money, he went ahead and opened himself like an e-commerce business on Amazon. And through that, he like actually lost all of his money because he was like, because he didn't know what he was doing. And
I was expecting some happy story.
And it was a stupid product he was selling, and it just didn't sell. And he even had to pay Amazon because he was storing it in an Amazon warehouse. So he was actually losing a lot of money. But the thing is, look, he did that. He was like 19. He learned a lot from that experience. He learned a lot about the logistics of it all. And now if he ever opens a new business, he'll know what to do with his money, right? Because he lost $5,000 now, which maybe in the future as an adult would have been like a lot more money than, $5,000.
Yeah. But I think that brings up an interesting point. The one that I like to make, between taking risk and being reckless, I think there's a certain medium that you have to find within the spectrum, right? Taking risk is that, okay, I'm aware that the stock market is risky. I'm aware that high beta stocks or stocks that are very volatile are risky. I'm aware that the tech is more risky than a bank, a financial institution, but I'm willing to take the risk because there's a potential to have a return.
For sure.
Right? Versus the flip side of being reckless. Being reckless is just saying, oh, well, or like for instance, the $5,000 investment to make something, to start a store on Amazon, right? That's taking a risk. But I'm sure he did his due diligence. I'm sure he did his research to say, okay, this looks like something that has a potential to make money. Whereas reckless is just going in, all eyes closed. This is what I'm investing. I'm putting 5,000 in penny stocks.
No, yeah,
I find that it's a bit reckless, especially when you don't know what you're doing. I'm taking $5,000, and I, there's a lot of ways of spending it, and I think you have to go on the risk and not go to the reckless side, where a line isn't always very well defined.
For sure. Well, especially in the stock market, a way people can, I say, in a way, minimize the risk is ETFs, where they pile up a bunch of stocks in one big bundle, and then you can just click on that bundle and buy that one thing, and you essentially have a say or have a play in a bunch of different stocks for the price of one, in a way.
Exactly.
And that really minimizes risks, especially if you could do that. You could put aside a lot of your money and just buy a bunch of ETFs, and then essentially set aside some part of that money, and then go ahead and take risks in other ways where you can learn. So for sure, there is a balance. People can decide for themselves, but it's just something people should, especially our age, they should think about, right? Yeah.
But that's the question of, you want to, an ETF is just, why would you want to pool many stocks together? And it's the same thing as an insurance company, right? There's two types of risk. There's market risk, and then there's specific risk, right? So in finance, we call it idiosyncratic, and we call it idiosyncratic, which is, oh my God, I'm forgetting. But you have market risk, and you've got firm risk. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the idea is you can always bring down the firm specific risk if you diversify your pool, if you diversify your holdings. Whereas, market risk has always be a certain minimum, right? So an insurance company is exactly what they do. They can't remove the risk that an asteroid is going to come, and there's going to be a meteorite in Montreal, and there's going to be there's all of a sudden there's going to be 3 million insurance claims, house insurance claims, mm-hmm. right? That's something that they can't diversify. But what they can diversify is take on policies with a lot of different individuals at different risk levels, so that in aggregate, if one person does a claim, that's fine because you've got less risky people, or if you've got enough people that to cover this risk. So if all of a sudden Facebook gets sued, well, that's a specific risk to that firm, right? And if you have all your money in Facebook, in that case, that's a bit risky. But if you now have 50% in Facebook, 50% in Apple, let's say, well, all of a sudden you only half of your portfolio, assuming that this lawsuit won't affect Apple, only 50% of your portfolio has actually gotten hit.
For sure.
Right, and as you diversify, and that's why ETFs as well, like yourself, you're able to minimize this firm-specific risk, but also benefit from when the market does well.
Of course, diversification. That's what an ETF is, and that's what everybody recommends.
Yeah.
Not necessarily about investing. I think just in general, you diversify in anything, you're reducing your risk. Like,
yeah,
twofold,
no, definitely.
for sure. Yeah.
What was the
next
third
point
principle?
I'll get to that. I was actually going to go to another one, but the third one actually was loss of education, which we kind of talked about, which has to do with the risks and how you can learn from that. And next point, assets. We also kind of talked about this, but here are some assets Robert Kiyosaki in his book he talks about. So there's the business. Oh, I think something fell. There's the business.
Is your microphone still there? Yeah,
it's there. So he talks about assets everybody should acquire. There's business that does not require your presence. There's stocks, bonds, income generating real estate, notes, IOUs, royalties from intellectual property such as music, scripts, and patents. And then he says anything else that has value, produces income, or appreciates and has a ready market. What do you think of that?
I think that's very fair. I think that's a very true statement. You want to be able to diversify your income because if something happens, you want to be able to have a certain safety net, right? A lot of people, when they start working in a company, right, they're going to have part of their compensation, part of their salary is through stock options, right? So I work at Bombardier, or I work at Nortel, right? Mm-hmm. And I have options, and my entire retirement savings is in this company's stock as in options. Well, if this company goes bankrupt, not only do you lose all your investments, but you also lose your job. So you got like a double. You're like a double whammy. You hit double. So if you're a real estate broker, right? If you just started off as a broker, you're 22 years old, and you start only investing in real estate properties. Well, if the market tanks, then you're not going to be doing transactions as a broker, but your value of your properties have also diminished. So now you're like you hit double, mm-hmm. right? But as soon as you start diversifying, in that case, well, now you're able to diminish your risk. And if one of the asset classes, so whether it be an IOU, a debt, income generating properties, stocks, anything else businesses that you don't have to be present, if any of them start doing well, you get to reap the benefits from it. But if they don't do well, in that case, at least it doesn't represent all your wealth.
Again, it has to do with diversification.
You're able to have a diversification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And essentially, I want to just note this. It's a side note, but we are students. A lot of us don't have the opportunity at this very specific moment to, let's say, buy some real estate and buy the stocks and do all of that at the same time. But you can start at places. Obviously, the barrier to entry for the stock market is a lot smaller than real estate. But you can, knowing all of these different options, you can find ways to maybe plan ahead and see where you want to be in life for you to, let's say, go ahead and put a down payment on a house and maybe buy more stocks or whatever the case is. So yeah, for sure. An interesting one he talks about, which kind of not a lot of people talk about, which is royalties from intellectual properties such as scripts, music, and patents. Now, I find that really interesting because what he's trying to say there is it kind of goes with another point he made, which is income generating things where you don't have to necessarily, it doesn't require your presence, which is your money working for itself, right? It's passive, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, intellectual property, the way that works is that, say, you have a song and it's copyrighted, patent, whatever the case is, by you. Let's say someone plays it on YouTube, on one of their YouTube videos. What happens is that YouTube tags that video, and all the AdSense that comes to that video goes to you. Now, that's one example of the ways this works, through copyright and through fair use. But the point I want to make is that there are ways for you to make money without having to necessarily be there all the time. And it's all automatic, and it gets into your bank account. It's very simple. Go ahead. You were going to say something?
Think of a photographer that takes pictures and puts that on stock image websites.
Exactly.
That's exactly what it is. If I like taking pictures of birds, right? Well, I could print the pictures and have them in my house, but I could also put them on a stock photo website, and I may make a cent, I may make nothing, but I also make $10, $100, $1,000, I don't know, but at least I get to turn my passion, my hobby, into a type of business, right? I'm not saying this will be enough, for it to be a full-time career and to be enough of a salary, but you're able to take what you like, right? Take your passion, take your hobby, and then monetize it in some way. In one way that you don't feel sold out. In a way that you're not feeling as like you're not being a sellout to yourself, where you're not doing it just because there's some remuneration, but you're doing it because you also enjoy the process of the creation.
For
right?
sure.
Like you like writing, right? So maybe you could put some scripts out, or maybe you like taking videos. You want to take some B-roll just of Montreal skyline. Well, you could take those and then put them on the website, and some people may want it.
But I think it doesn't necessarily only have to do with like the arts. Like it's not only about writing music, scripts, whatever it is, photography. It's also like with a job you take or the job you decide you want to do in the future. Like an entrepreneur or just a businessman who has his own company in general. There's no like maximum amount of money that person can make. Also, the risk is much higher, but compared to someone who works, let's say, at a very reputable and steady company. But that's also something you should think about. Working at a bank per se, they're going to give you a very solid salary, and that there's going to be a paycheck that comes in every 2 weeks, and that's going to be it. But as an entrepreneur, you might have the chance to make like 2, 3, 4, 5 times that salary. Maybe not at a steady amount. Maybe it's going to be like a one-time big pay, which is a lot of the time what a lot of people go through. It's like 10 years of nothing, and then there's like a year where like their company goes and it's like intellectual public offering and they make a bunch of money. But whatever the case is, it's like it's not just in the arts. You can think about your salary too.
Yeah, no, that's true. But that's why entrepreneurship is one of the most respected. I'm taking a class right now on entrepreneurship, and there's a study showing that entrepreneurs are like the most respected professions, or one of the most respected professions, up there with firefighters and paramedics, because they're people who take risks, and they're people who aren't willing, aren't scared to put themselves out there. But also, there's also this trend now of almost culpabiliser, to put down these CEOs, these billionaire CEOs, and this is a personal opinion, but these people worked hard, right? They sacrificed a lot. They created tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of jobs. So I think it's okay for them to reap the benefits of their labor. Now, does that mean they should be worth 20 billion, 40 billion, 100 billion? That's a different debate, right? But you worked hard. You put yourself in a vulnerable situation. You left, most of the time you left a good paying job, or you quit. You quit college, and you're able to create value for people. Well, as an entrepreneur, that's what your goal is, right? And if that just happens to come into the effects of 10, 100, or $100 million or $1 billion, then I have a very difficult, and you tell me what your opinion is, but I have a very difficult way of justifying what's wrong with that.
No, I totally agree, but it also has to do with like the extremities of it all, and maybe inequality and whatever the case is. But you're right. At the end of the day, if you're bringing a lot of value to society, you should be able to get a reward for that. Again, like you said, that doesn't mean you should be worth like $60 billion. You might maybe be worth a few million, or like, I don't know, $1 billion. You decide what you think is like okay. I'm not the one to tell you.
I think I'll be fine. I think $1 billion should be enough.
I don't know. Like, I personally don't know. I haven't thought of that too much, but I totally agree. Like, you should be rewarded for the value you bring to society. Again, the people who more often than not are worth billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, like you said, had to sacrifice a lot. And there are a lot of people who did exactly what they did and failed, because it's not as secure as it is. When something is riskier, it also means that if it hits, you're like hitting big time. You know what I mean? But if it falls, you're gonna fall hard. There's no in between a lot of the time. So that's something
there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of luck that comes into play as well, right? There's timing is very important, right? In Cinema Now was released in the late 1990s, okay, and they essentially they were an online movie broadcasting service, kind of like Netflix is. But they were too ahead of their time, right? So you could have a great idea, but just not placed at the right time. So in the beginning of 2000s, internet connection wasn't fast enough. Not everyone had a computer. Not everyone had iPhones came out in 2007. You know, the iPod Nano was in the beginning of 2000s. So they were just too ahead of your time. So a great idea, if the timing is wrong, you know, that goes into luck, right? And it's too bad for cinema now that they were able to, that didn't flourish like Netflix is doing now. But Netflix was also able to adapt to their clientele, right? They were offered to be bought. They were offering themselves to Blockbuster for $50 million in mid 2000s. You know, look what happened from there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it brings me to a point I want to make where it was in a book I read. A lot of people read this book. It's Malcolm Gladwell's. I forget the name. You know which one I'm talking about. The one he talks about 10,000 hours. What is that book called?
Yeah.
How do I forget this? It's like one of the most famous books, like biggest bestseller ever. Anyways, it's one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. He talks about the 10,000 hour rule, but in it he talks about how successful people in outliers. Yes, outliers. Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah.
And in it he talks about how a lot of it, like you said, it's timing. Like all of these, like the Bill Gates of this world and the Steve Jobs, like all of these people, they were born at a time when they were able to start working in tech right when tech was about to flourish, because it was like in this in-between period from it being like where computers and were the size of like houses or like the size of big rooms to becoming like what we put in our pockets, right? Like that transition period, it was just like they happened to be born at that time. And all of these people, 1955, 1956, 1953, that's when they were all born, which was funny enough. It makes another point about like hockey players. How a lot of hockey players who play in the NHL, they're all born in January. All of them. Because like it had to do with how like people born in January get to play with the older kids and don't have to necessarily like stay with their year class, so they're more competitive when they're younger and blah blah blah. Now, they might be extreme points. A lot of it might be wrong. You decide. I think there is something there that we can learn from timing, like you said.
No, but that effect is definitely true. You know, there's a disproportionate. I'd read this a few years ago, but there was a disproportionate amount of elite sports players who are born in the first few months of the year. Like, I don't forget what it is, but like 40% or 50% of elite players are born in like January and February because they get to. I think it's because they're the oldest of their cohort. So when they're drafted, they're they're like the best in their team, but they're also 11 months older than the one who's born in December.
And it makes a big difference when you're a teenager. 11 months means like the person that's 11 months older can be like 5 inches taller than you just because puberty hit faster. You know what I mean? So yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah. It's a question of luck, right?
Exactly.
There's a bit of luck, and you know, you could be the best NBA player. You could be the best. You know, you could want to be so good at basketball, but if you're 4.5 feet tall and you can't dunk, there's only so far you could go, right? You want to be the best football player, but at some point, you know, there's a certain amount of luck that has to come into there. Where if your physiology, if your actual body's not made for it, it has nothing to do with personal finance.
No, it does. I was going to bring it back to personal finance. You'll see. Just finish your point. You'll see.
But yeah, if you're not like, if you don't have this, you know, I could want to be the best, you know, basketball player, but you know, like, you know, 5'9" and 3/4 on a good day, and I'm not that good either. So you know, my willpower can only get me so far.
Yeah. Well, all of this has to do with self-awareness, and I think a big part. And this is how I want to bring it back to finance. Be self-aware, like know who you are before going into anything, especially in the finance world that has to do with money. And money is very powerful because it means that like that's what puts food on your table. That's how you can have a house, like shelter. But that also means that's like money can also buy you like luxuries in life. You know what I mean? But when you go ahead and pick a job, be self-aware. If you're not the type of person if you're the type of person that cannot take the risk of, say, what an entrepreneur does, which means like anything can fall, like your entire career can basically fail any day, like, you know, tomorrow or the day after. If that gives you anxiety, don't go ahead and like become an entrepreneur. Maybe working, say, at a bank will bring you a lot more peace of mind and will make you happier. You know, it really depends. It's all about self-awareness. And a huge chunk of that self-awareness will come through university or through high school and through experience. So just make sure you know that. It's all about education, like we talked about before too. Educate yourself. Maybe putting in some risk to learn about a certain topic in the finance world might help you for when you're 30, 40, 50.
No, definitely. I think it's important to know who you are, because by doing so, you'll be able to set yourself up, for success in whatever means that you want, right? And that's completely fine, right? That's why you've got people who are that's why you've got a range of opportunities, is because some people work in better situations. If you're the best if you're the worst communicator, well, don't go inside a PR position, right? But that's fine. But you have to be able to know that, right? And you have to sit down and say, okay, what are my risk tolerances? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Mm-hmm. Like, I know that I have certain weaknesses that, as much as I work to improve them, there's always going to be someone who'll be better than me in that,
For
right?
sure.
That's a fact. It's a realization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, so let me see what my strengths are, and then work with those, and then be able to bring value to as many people as I can through my strengths, mm-hmm. and not necessarily try. I know that I can't sing very well. Okay, I can't really sing either, but I'm not gonna, I could take classes and I could record and I could put all the effort I can do, but at some point, there's gonna be someone who's better than me, right? And as opposed to focusing all my energy in that, I'd rather focus my energy in other things.
Yeah, it's risk.
That's kind of, being self-aware. It's risk management, exactly.
Risk management, and you might be that person who has been told no, you can't their whole lives, and 15 years later, after being really shitty when you started, you actually become one of the best. That's definitely possible. Mm-hmm. That is rare though. You should be very, very, again, self-aware. Everything we're saying right here, it all ties in together. And I just want to go to the next book that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, which is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. And a big part, I lost the bookmark but I do remember what it talked about, which is a lot of people get, whenever they try and find any advice when it comes to investing or managing their money and all of that stuff, is that there are so many words that are thrown their way that it can be very overwhelming. And I am aware a lot of people might hear all of this and still be very much lost. What the hell is a bond? ETFs? What are you saying? These are just letters to me. It's just, I think people should know that it's okay, or they should just start.
Not to know.
It's okay not to know, and just start. By being a player in this game, you just learn. When I started investing, I barely knew anything, right? I started investing before I even took an economics course. I mean, I took one in high school, but I'm talking about university. I didn't know what an ETF was. I was just I don't know, you invest in stocks, right? That first thing I did was the robo-advisors, with a broker where they... Wealthsimple, where they just invest your money for you. But through that, through putting my money into Wealthsimple and letting it do its thing, and then me going in and seeing what it was doing, figuring out what an ETF was and what kind of ETFs it was investing in, I was able to learn about the stock market. And then through that, I was able to transition into a self-directed portfolio where I'm the one picking my ETFs and my stocks, right? So again, be a player. Just start with something. You will learn by doing, right? Don't be too scared.
$100.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't need much.
Exactly. Don't be too scared of losing even $100 if you just want to learn. Don't be too scared of losing that $100. Again, it has to do with education. Especially in the stock market, where the benefits outweigh the risk a lot of the times, the cost. Be a player. Don't be too overwhelmed with all of these letters and all of these words, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot. I could talk about these complicated terms and everything, but at the end of the day, investing is not rocket science. It's really, there's a ways of complicating it. Mm-hmm. But as an individual investor, as a individual, as a sole person, you don't have to be a genius in everything. You have to just understand enough so that you could get your feet wet and you're comfortable in the position, right? If you have no idea what you're doing, then maybe not. I wouldn't say, okay, go full on 100% equities tomorrow morning. But if if you're interested enough and you're willing to take the initiative, right? You're self-aware that you want to learn more, and you're aware that the benefits of compounding are exponential for every year you start before, mm-hmm. right? Every day that you wait is 10 times its value in 30 years, 40 years.
For sure.
But it's a question of, like you said, you want to start now, and there's a lot of but it's fine to be a bit intimidated because it is kind of complicated. But you go online, hopefully through these chats you'll be able to understand and follow my Instagram, and I post a video every day talking about
the plug
some finance. Link in the description below.
Plug your Instagram. I know you want to do it, Marc.
No, it's fine. But it's a question of there's a lot of ways of overcomplicating it. But there's a way of dumbing it down and bringing it to a way that's very, very manageable.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we'll dive about this in another week of really diving into what are some of the terms, and then we'll define some of these terms.
For sure.
And that could be fun.
I just want to say something about the whole just starting out. It has to do with, personally, I'm still trying to learn a lot about, say, just making videos, just, creating content for people and just figuring out ways to communicate as best as possible. And, I did realize that because I went to film school in CJEP, and I did realize that a lot of it had to do with, we're being told a lot of these real fun concepts like what composition is, what a white balance is, how to use a camera, how to tell a story. It's all very, very informative. But at the end of the day, I realized this is just personal, but it has to do with finance. What I could do is maybe start making my own projects and putting them on the internet, making a YouTube video, doing this podcast, learning how to communicate without necessarily having to know all the theory, that you become a player, right? It's scary, but once you get into it, you learn, and maybe 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line, or 20, you can become an expert just because you started now. So don't be afraid to, hey, you don't know what bonds is, what an ETF is, or all of that stuff. Don't be afraid to just start, because in 10 years, you might know a lot more than you think you were able to know.
Yeah, but that goes right back to what we started with, the question of overeducation, right? There's a certain certain threshold you have to, that you have to pass in order to say, okay, I know enough, let me start, right? You want to start filming. Well, I have to know how the camera works, the basics. Maybe understand how Final Cut works, or maybe just iMovie. Learn what an SD card is, and then learn that you need a microphone maybe, so that the audio is pass up, has a minimum. That's pretty much it, and that your iPhone could pretty much do everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Just know that, the question is, as soon as you start creating value for someone else, you find a niche market and you're able to, to serve this market and create value for these people. In that case, everything else is secondary, right? I think one of my favorite YouTubers, Doug DeMiro, he's 3.5 million subscribers, but he's also, in the car community. He shoots with his iPhone. He has 1 million views per episode. He shoots his iPhone. Every other video has audio issues. He has a clip-on mic. He wears two t-shirt, two t-shirts. The white balance is terrible. Lighting is minimal.
But the content is good. Exactly. The story is good.
But the content is good.
Yeah.
So his videos are half an hour long, shot on his iPhone with a tripod, and he still gets 1 million views per episode because the value and the content is good.
Yeah.
Right, so that's where your strengths and your weaknesses. I know that I'm not a good videographer. Maybe he should put a bit more effort, learn a bit of videography, but maybe that he has no interest in that. But what your strengths are? You're self-aware with what you're good at, delivering content, speaking to an audience, and delivering value to a niche group. And that's there's a lot of value to be created through there.
For sure, and
without necessarily being the best at everything.
And I kind of want to wrap this episode up with this one point you made, which is creating value. I think by building yourself up as a student and by learning about money, finance, whatever other industry you're interested in, you can become a person that is educated enough, has the experience to go ahead and create value for others. Because by creating value for others, people are willing to basically give back to you. Right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So with that, I just want to end with, I guess that was my one point, my one final one-liner point that I wanted to make, which is, that. What is yours? What is yours?
No, but I think that's a very fair point, and I'm gonna kind of echo what you said. It's the fact that as soon as you're aware of your strengths and you're aware of your weaknesses, work on your strengths. And try to nurture your weaknesses, or at least make them the least impactful possible in your career or in your personal life or whatever, and then find a way to create value for someone else, right? Whether that be through advisory services, whether that be through building websites, whether that be through giving legal advice or whatever you do, or just creating content that people enjoy watching. if you're able to bring value to someone else, you could build a chair. Like if you could build
That is
like
value.
literally anything, you could design clothing. Like
Yeah.
as long as you could create value for someone else, and someone is willing to say, "Oh, that thing has made my life better," or "That thing has eased my
Exactly.
suffering," then in that case, go for it.
For sure.
And that's how you create value. And I think that's how I'm still figuring myself out through there, but that's how you create wealth, and that's how you ultimately succeed, because you're able to help others and make the world a better place.
What a wonderful way to end the podcast. That's
Not
like
bad.
the cherry on top. I love it. Well, with that, this has been episode 2 of the Money Class podcast. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you to our YouTube viewers for watching. And we'll see you again next week for episode 3. All right. Bye, guys.
Yeah. Take care, guys.
This has been episode 2 of the Money Class podcast. If you liked the episode, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast. You release a new episode every week. With that being said, see you next week with episode 3. Bye-bye.